Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Cynic, titled Kindly Bent to Free Us. But first, before we begin, a question for you all. How many albums do you listen to in a year? Now, this year with reviewing, I'm probably set to break about 200, probably more. The average person, I reckon, probably doesn't get more than above 5% of that, 10 albums, and even that with some music fans sounds charitable. What it all ends up meaning is that I expose myself to a ton of music on a very regular basis from many different genres, and on a technical level, you start to begin to learn how to recognize unique facets in certain bands, what makes them special. You learn to hear guitar texture, or triggering in the kick drums, or nuance in the vocal delivery, or true instrumental complexity done in a cohesive manner, especially if you have a musical background, which I do. But the average listener doesn't care about these things. Hell, most music fans don't care about these elements, which puts me, along with some other critics, in a bit of a complicated situation when it comes to popular acts who attempt more experimental albums and then screw it up. Now, the two immediate examples that come to my mind in recent weeks are Mind Over Matter by Young the Giant and The Outsiders by Eric Church. Two albums that tried more technical experimentation in their instrumentation, and they didn't do it well by any stretch of the mind. It wasn't cohesive, it didn't flow well together with the rest of the track, and I gotta be honest, it just sounded sloppy. But the average listener who might not have that breadth of experience, they're never going to pick up on that. Hell, they might find it mind-blowing if they don't know otherwise and they don't have that breadth of experience. And as a critic, it's a delicate balance between recognizing your own perspective, broader though it might be, and then criticizing an act for poor execution when most people in the mainstream probably wouldn't know it. Now, that's not a recanting of my opinions. I stand by my comments regarding those acts, harsh as though they may be, and while I can identify possible knowledge gaps in my audience, willful ignorance and blind myopia infuriates me to no end. So let's aim to correct some of that and introduce you all to a band that you probably don't know if you don't listen to progressive metal, and one of my go-to acts when pointing out how to make complex, technical music incredibly well. The genre-defying band known as Cynic. They started in the late 80s, but then they exploded with their debut album Focus in 1993, which is widely considered one of the best progressive albums ever released, even though defining the genre that Cynic fit in was always something of a challenge. Death metal growling juxtaposing with spacey vocoder singing, progressive time signatures fused with jazz-inspired harmonies and rhythms. It was an album that was not looking to make it easy upon the listener and demanded a lot of listens to truly decode and unpackage. But even still, it was an awe-inspiring debut album, and it remains a classic to this day. And then Cynic split up and didn't release any new material for 15 years. They thankfully reunited in 2006, and 2 years later released Traced in Air, an album that took steps away from the band's rougher sound and towards a smoother, spacier sound. And let me stress this, the album is a goddamn masterpiece, one of the best of 2008 and a longtime favorite of mine. I honestly like it more than I like Focus. But that album, along with the remixed album Retraced and the EP Carbon-Based Anatomy, were signs that Cynic wasn't content with being a traditional metal band by any stretch of the mind, or one that could be easily defined. And with early buzz suggesting that their newest album had dropped the growling entirely and had moved even further towards progressive space rock and jazz fusion, I had no idea what to expect from the oddly titled Kindly Bent to Free Us. So, how'd it turn out? Well, let me stress that I do like this album a fair bit. Even with the additional genre shift, Cynic still brings an impressive amount of technical quality to the table across the board that I really did definitely appreciate. However, this album doesn't feel as cohesive or impressive as their previous two albums, and while I do think that was part of the album's overall point to go a little bit broader and more existential, I can't help but feel that this is their weakest release. Now, one thing is for sure, this album will definitely polarize Cynic fans, especially those of their earlier work, and like with every Cynic release, it's one that requires a number of listens to fully digest and appreciate both the good and the bad. Even though with some of the less extreme vocals, it would probably be some of their most accessible album to date, which is kind of funny in a twisted sort of way. So first, let's start with the element that is arguably the least significant on a Cynic release, the lyrics. Now, given the choice for the vocals to be placed higher and more prominently in the mix, I was able to parse out more of the lyrics than usual. And at first glimpse, they really don't seem to make a lot of sense. Descriptive, but oblique, with a lot of intriguing symbolism lurking underneath the surface, but nothing all that direct. But then you realize that the title was more descriptive than expected, because Kindly Bent to Free Us is an album exploring strange encounters that are beyond the human mind's ability to comprehend. Possibly drug-induced, possibly alien, possibly even just in the raw beauty of nature itself, something that's above and beyond. It's a natural topic for Cynic to explore, and there's a lot of descriptive nuance in the lyrics talking about said experiences, most of which involve giving into such experiences and letting yourself get carried along and sucked into the spatial ride. But in other words, it's a lot less about the underlying meaning behind the lyrics, presuming there is one that we're capable of understanding, which Cynic seems to put forward that there isn't, and more about the experience as a whole, more about the sensory overload. And really, for Cynic's insane fusion of jazz fusion and prog-inspired space metal, it's a natural fit. The death metal elements are almost completely gone at this point, with no growling and most of the guitars bringing a little less crackle and force. The jazz elements and interweaving harmonies, though, are where Cynic seems to have placed their greatest focus, with the more prominent bass guitar juxtaposing really quite well with some of the cleaner guitar leads. And while I say I would prefer a stronger, meatier, raw guitar with more force, or a more progressive focus when it came to the technical songwriting, I don't deny that they execute the jazz elements really quite well here. And the drumming, as always, lends this album a lot of badly needed forward momentum, which only helps carry you along in this progressive ride. Unfortunately, the instrumental compositions are where I feel that Cynic does stumble a little bit. The interplay between the bass guitar and the regular electric guitars isn't quite as tight and cohesive as it's been in the past, which can come across, at least to me, as a little bit of a simplification. On top of that, the space rock elements, while very well presented and atmospheric, they can drag a bit, especially when the melody lines just aren't as interesting. Sure, on Infinite Shapes and Getting Jolly, the melodies are beautiful and memorable, and the band has a natural gift for atmosphere, which means I'll never be inclined to turn off their music, but at some point, some of the spacier elements can go on a little bit long and feel more than a little unfocused, especially on some of the longer tracks like the title track. But of course, everyone who's a Cynic fan is going to be talking about the increased focus on Paul Masvidal's vocals. So let's get this out of the way. It's a good fit for the sound that Cynic was trying to create, at least in my opinion. But at the same time, I wasn't really blown away. More than once I was reminded of Tom York from Radiohead or Porcupine Tree frontman Steven Wilson. But the difference came in York and Wilson's charisma and their ability to write emotionally evocative songs. And I'm not convinced from this album that Masvidal has it in the same way. And considering I don't find the lyrics adding up to much deeper subtext, beyond some admittedly solid symbolism and some absolutely gorgeous descriptive passages, I have to question the choice to move them to a more prominent position in the mix. And when I'm talking about the lyrics here. On top of that, I wouldn't say that Masvidal has the greatest emotional range, especially considering that the tonal balance on this record can get pretty weird, all things considered. Songs like The Lion's Roar and Endlessly Bountiful have way more upbeat melodies in the keyboards and much more invigorating subject matter in the lyrics, but I have to admit, Masvidal's delivery doesn't really manage to strike a chord with me, and it doesn't feel cohesive with the balancing act between airy melodies and rougher instrumentation that's always made Cynic something special in the progressive metal scene. Hell, maybe the death growls maybe would have contributed better to that balance. Look, I do like this album. Let me stress this. It's frequently beautiful. Everyone brings a ton of real legitimate talent to the forefront, and Cynic really are inventing a new genre of jazz-inspired progressive space metal that's aiming to sound alien and weird and off-putting. And on a basis of just being a grand, impossible musical experience, it's a brilliant wallow in technical excess and oblique weirdness. But at the same time, this album just isn't as tight, focused, or for me, poignant in the same way that the previous works have really struck a chord with me. And coupled with a few production missteps, I get the uneasy feeling that Cynic's experimentation is simply becoming for its own sake, and in order to produce music unlike anything else you'd ever hear. And at the same time, that experimentation doesn't really seem to have a greater underlying purpose. And look, while I don't deny that experimentation for its own sake has a really important place in music, here it didn't quite resonate with me as much as I really wanted it to. So look, all that being said, this album is still an 8 out of 10 for me and a definite recommendation. If you're looking for music that is challenging, beautiful, incredibly technical, and worth many, many listens, I highly recommend Cynic's Kindly Bend to Free Us. It might not be an easy listen, especially not on that first time, but trust me, it's worth it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like me to cover throughout the course of this year, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. So until then, see you next time.